conflicts like the Ukrainian ones and became the root causes of many conflicts in the late 20th to the early 21st century. Now no one is safe as a result of that. We should come back to the origins and correct the mistakes made, but the indivisibility of security today, unlike in late 80s and early 90s, is a much more complex phenomenon. It's not only about the military and political balance and the consideration of each other's interests. Our security, the security of humankind, depends on our capability to respond to challenges that stem from man-made and natural disasters, technological development, new rapid social demographic information developments. All those things are interrelated, happening on their own in an unpredictable way, having their own intrinsic logic and laws, and sometimes not in coordination with the will and expectations of people. The humanity risks to be left behind in this situation as a side observer, not being capable of ruling the situation or managing the situation. This is a systemic challenge for all of us. And definitely this is an opportunity for all of us to work together. There are no off-the-shelf answers, but I believe that to resolve global challenges, we need first to approach them without this ideological predetermination, without didactic tone. In this spirit, I'll explain how it is done to you.
Secondly, it is important to understand that this common, indivisible affair that requires joint work of all the countries and nations, each culture and civilization should make their own contribution, because allow me to reiterate, on our own, nobody knows the right answer. It can be fostered only in the process of joint constructive search, by uniting and not dividing our efforts and national experiences of different states. Allow me to repeat myself. Conflicts and clashes of interest have existed and continue to exist, and they will exist. The issue is how we solve the multipolar world, as I've already mentioned, is the return to classic diplomacy, where the key to resolution is through mutual understanding, mutual respect, and not coercion. Classic diplomacy was able to take into account the viewpoints of different entities of international life, this complexity of concerts of multiple powers. But in due time, it was replaced through Western diplomacy of monologue, of endless lessons and demands. And instead of resolving conflicts, they started pushing forward their own narrow interests, considering any other interest unworthy of attention. Should we be surprised that instead of resolving conflicts, they've provoked further escalation of these conflicts, and they're passing to the bloody armed phase, turning into humanitarian catastrophe? By acting like this, we cannot solve a single problem. And over 30 years, there have been endless examples of that. One of them is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, that through the script of Western unilateral diplomacy, fully overlooking history, tradition, identity, the culture of people living there, they can't solve. Just as they can't stabilize the situation in the Middle East, which in turn continues to degrade. And we're taking a closer look at the initiatives of President Trump. But I believe there could be light at the end of the tunnel. Horrible example is the Ukrainian tragedy. It's pain for both Ukrainians and Russians, for all of us. The reasons for the Ukrainian conflict are well known to anyone who has gone far enough to look at the back history of its current most critical stage. And I will not repeat myself. I'm sure that everyone here is well aware and understands my position on the issue. I have voiced it many, many times, but we also know something else. Those who encouraged, goaded, and armed Ukraine, stirring it up against Russia, for decades fostered rampant nationalism and neo-Nazism, simply couldn't care less, not only for Russian interests, but for Ukrainian interests, either for true interests of the people of that country. They have no remorse for that people. It's nothing but expendable material for globalist expansionists on the West, as well as their serfs in Kiev. The results of reckless filibusterism speak for themselves. Let's ask ourselves another question. Could it be different? And allow me to go back to what President Trump said. He said that had he been in power, that could have been avoided. And I agree with that statement. It's true, it could have been avoided had the work been built differently with the U.S. administration back in the day. If Ukraine hadn't been turned into a destructive weapon in someone else's arms, had they not used the Northern Atlantic bloc approaching our borders, had Ukraine preserved its independence, its true sovereignty. And another question, how should we have resolved bilateral Russian-Ukrainian issues that were obviously consequence of disintegration of a massive country and complex geopolitical transformations? I believe that even the disintegration of the USSR had to do with the position of the Russian leadership back in the day to get rid of any ideological confrontation, hoping that now that we've dealt with communism, now we will build a true flourishing world. No, but it seems that there are other factors at play, geopolitical and factors of different kind, and ideological clashes had nothing to do with it. How should they be resolved in a polycentric world? And how would the situation in Ukraine be resolved? Its different poles would test out the situation of the Ukrainian conflict for themselves. These potential pressure points, rifts that exist in their own regions, and then the collective response would be much more responsible and reasonable. At the basis of resolving would be the understanding that all the participants of this complex situation have their own interests. They're grounded in objective and subjective circumstances. They must not be overlooked. Efforts of all countries in their quest for security and development are legitimate. Of course, this applies for Ukraine, for Russia, and for all our neighbors. It's the states of the region who should have the final say in creating the regional system. It's these countries who have the best chance at agreeing on a universally acceptable model of cooperation because it affects them directly. It is of their vital interests. For other countries, this situation in Ukraine is a bargaining chip in a different, much larger game, their own game. And generally, that game has nothing to do with specific issues of countries, or in this case, for that country or those countries involved in the conflict. It's just a pretext to solve their own goals as well as to profit from war. That's why they showed up on our doorstep with NATO infrastructure. For years they sat idly by, gazing at the Donbass tragedy, the genocide, at the extermination of Russian people at our ancestral historical lands that started in 2014 after the bloody coup d'etat in Ukraine. In contrast to this behavior that was demonstrated by Europe and, until recently, the US, is the conduct of the global majority states. They refuse to take sides. They aspire to truly contribute to the creation of a just world, and we're grateful to all the states who in recent years have taken genuine effort to try and find a way out of this situation. These are our partners, the founders of BRICS, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, the Belarus, North Korea. These are our friends in the Arab Islamic world. First and foremost, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, Iran, Serbia, Hungary, Slovakia in Europe, and many African and Latin American countries. Unfortunately, so far we haven't been able to stop the hostilities, but the responsibility for that lies not on the majority for this inability, but on the minority, first and foremost Europe, who continue to escalate the conflict. And I believe there is no other goal over there. At the same time, I believe that goodwill shall prevail, and we have no doubt about this. I believe that the situation is changing gradually in Ukraine. No matter how brainwashed people may get, there are still some shifts in their ideology, and in other parts of the world as well. At the same time, the phenomenon of the global majority is a new development in the international life. Allow me to say a few words about that as well. What is its purpose? That the overwhelming majority of states is aimed at implementing their own civilized interests, the main of which is its balanced progressive development,